The story of the Forbidden Bible begins some 150 years after the birth of Jesus. It was an obscure figure in history, a man named Marcion, who became the unlikely catalyst for a Christian version of the Holy Bible. He was a man of great wealth and strong convictions.
Marcion of Pontus was called the Mus Ponticus, the Pontic rat. He was a church leader who was a very wealthy individual. He owned his own ship. He was involved in the shipping industry. And he not only was very wealthy, but he had some very strict theological points of view. He was a Bible-believing, Bible-thumping Christian who believed everything that he thought was Christian in the Bible. But when he looked at the Jewish Bible, what he saw there startled him and appalled him, because he was very literalistic in his reading. And so he took a look at the Jewish Bible and he thought he saw a God there who was harsh and vindictive and legalistic. And Marcion said, "That's not the God that I believe in."
Marcion was convinced that the God of the Hebrew Bible was not the God taught by Jesus. Without any church authority, Marcion created his own Christian Bible. Hebrew Scripture, what Christians call the Old Testament, was banned in this book. The only writings he considered worthy were Luke's Gospel, with all references to the Old Testament erased, and Paul's letters.
Considering what Marcion did, it's no wonder that one of his opponents said, "Shame on Marcion's eraser." Marcion wanted very badly to be accepted as a great church leader, and one day he met somebody who was very well known, and he came up to the person and he said, "Don't you recognize who I am?" And this other church leader turned to Marcion and said, "Yes, you're the firstborn of Satan."
In spite of his notoriety among second-century Christian leaders, Marcion's basic idea took hold. The new Christian religion should have a Bible to call its own. The church fathers of Marcion's day began to create lists, books they believed had to be included in a Christian Bible, and books that should be left out. There was no shortage of material. Some of these individual writings had been circulating separately and randomly within Christian communities, large and small, since the end of the first century. The four Gospels, the Acts of the Apostles, the Epistles of Timothy and Titus, and the letters of the Apostle Paul.
These were personal letters. They were occasional letters that addressed the needs in the various churches. And if Paul had any idea what people would do with his letters in terms of theologizing on the basis of them, he would have been a whole lot more careful when he wrote them.
By the year 150 AD, hundreds of manuscripts were being written by the emerging Christian leaders and theologians throughout the Roman Empire and beyond. But another century would pass without an officially recognized Bible. Then, on October 28, 312, everything changed. A man named Constantine had a vision of a cross in the sky as he prepared to do battle for the city of Rome. Legend has it that Jesus spoke to him in a vision, saying, "In my name, conquer." The following day, he won the battle, defeated the superior force of Maxentius, his rival, and became the sole emperor of Rome. It was the vision of this cross and the victory that followed that fueled Constantine's newfound interest in the Christian faith. The pagan civilization that had overseen the crucifixion of Jesus was about to adopt the faith it once tried to destroy.
Constantine, as emperor, had a number of things he was dealing with. He was a shrewd politician, a statesman, a diplomat, a warrior, but he realized that he needed to have some order and some unity in the empire, and that order and unity could come through at least having some religion or some religious purpose that could bring all people together, because religion could be something that could unite the empire,
The Near East at the time of Constantine was a massive conglomeration of different perspectives, different peoples, different races, different religions. It really was a very mixed situation. There were differing Jewish groups. There was a diversity of Christian groups. There was all kinds of dialogue going on.
You have the little Christian church on one end of the corner. You have the pagan worship on the other end of the corner. People go where they want to go, but at the same time they have questions about what door you're walking into. And then you have the contentions within each of these communities about what's the proper way to worship.
There were in the early church a wide variety of ways of being Christian. One could be a Jewish Christian, one could be a Gentile Christian, one could be more Gnostic in one's point of view, one could be very mystical, one could be rather legalistic.
Even so, a battle was raging in the early churches. Arius, a monastic from the city of Alexandria, believed that Jesus was the highest created being, but he was not God. In vehement opposition to this opinion was Athanasius, bishop of the Alexandrian Church. It was his passionate belief that Jesus was both man and God. These two men fought fiercely over this one question: was the Savior human, or was he divine? For the sake of his Roman Empire, Constantine needed to solve this bitter dispute once and for all. And thus, 300 years after the Romans executed Jesus, Constantine summoned all the Christian bishops in order to unify the church. The meeting was to take place in his summer palace in the seaside resort of Nicaea in what is today modern Turkey.
When he brought all the bishops together at Nicaea, what was on his mind was that they all would agree on the question, the divinity and the humanity of Jesus. How is that to be explained? And the important thing for him was one explanation. So there was a huge pressure on them to agree on something. They had to walk out in agreement.
The agreement these bishops would hammer out eventually became known as the Nicene Creed. It declared that Jesus was both man and God. Athanasius, the bishop from Alexandria, had won the day.
I believe in one God, Father Almighty, maker of heaven. All of these concepts are in the creed, but they're biblical concepts. So the point then is, let's put together a work, a volume, a book, a codex. Let us now decide what will go into it, into the canon, that can be acceptable to the entire church. Not one piece here, one piece there, to the entire church.
One man who was present at the Council of Nicaea was Eusebius, bishop of Caesarea in Palestine. Eusebius was fascinated by Christian antiquities, and he had immersed himself in the manuscripts housed in two nearby Christian libraries, one in Caesarea, another in Jerusalem. The same year the Council of Nicaea met, Eusebius published his church history. In it was a list of 18 books he believed should make up a Christian canon.
And what was interesting about that is that he mentions 3 different types of books that people were reading. There were the accepted ones, such as the 4 Gospels, the Acts of the Apostles, Paul's letters. These were all accepted.
Next in order, the extant former Epistle of John, and likewise the Epistle of Peter, must be recognized. After these must be put, if it really seems right, the Apocalypse of John, concerning which we shall give the different opinions at the proper time.
Eusebius was only too aware that many of his contemporaries thought John's Apocalypse bordered on the heretical, that its violent imagery seemed at war with the Savior's message of peace.
Then a mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone, and threw it into the sea, saying, With such violence Babylon, the great city, will be thrown down, and will be found no more.
Do you really want to have a book like that in the canon, with all the fire and brimstone and the hatred and the anger and the animosity that is found there? Do you really want all that damnation in the Bible?
But he mentions other ones that he thinks are disputed, including ones that we now have in. For example, 2nd and 3rd letter of John, 2nd letter of Peter, letter of James, letter of Jude. He calls them disputed. And he mentions other ones that are not in at the moment. And then there's the heretical ones that are not in anyone's list.
Books that were considered forbidden were books that aren't really sanctioned. In other words, you have things like The Shepherd of Hermas that are stories that are being told about Jesus, but they don't have any veracity. They may be part of a certain community's canon, but they're not part of the total canon. In other words, they're not things that people in other parts of the Christian world would recognize.
6 years after the Council of Nicaea, Emperor Constantine sent a letter to Bishop Eusebius, giving him the job of creating an official Christian Bible.
I have thought it expedient to instruct your prudence to order 50 copies of the sacred scriptures to be written on prepared parchment in a legible manner and in a convenient portable form by professional transcribers thoroughly practiced in their art.
Eusebius simply took the list from the church history he had written, 18 books he believed worthy of inclusion, and assembled these into Constantine's Bible. In stark contrast to Marcion's version of a Christian Bible, this volume combined the Hebrew Scriptures with a set of Christian manuscripts, an Old and a New Testament.
50 beautiful Bibles done on vellum and parchment for the churches of Constantinople. There's no indication that Constantine saw a problem with disputed books or different canons or different lists. That's not there at all. What he seemed to be concerned with is Constantinople, his new capital called after himself, of course, was going to have lots of new churches. He wanted a beautiful Bible enshrined in each of those churches.
But this Bible, commissioned by the Roman Emperor, was lost to time, and with it, the precise list of books it contained.
There are possibilities. For example, we have 2 4th century codices, books of the Bible, the entire Bible. One is called the Codex Vaticanus because it's in the Vatican. The other is the Codex Sinaiticus, which is in the British Library. It was found at Mount Sinai, St. Catherine's Monastery. And we can't be sure of the contents because there's missing pages.
If either of these ancient fragmentary documents are indeed copies of Constantine's Bible, it appears their contents differ from Eusebius's list. There are at least 2 disputed books included in Codex Sinaiticus: The Shepherd of Hermas, a popular book among early Christians, and the Epistle of Barnabas. Yet even after Constantine's beautifully rendered Bibles were sent to the churches in Constantinople, it would be another 40 years before a final list of 27 New Testament books would be officially canonized by the Church.
What we have to understand is that nobody wrote the New Testament. The New Testament is an assembled library, small library of documents. They had to make a major discussion of, are we going to have the Hebrew Scriptures in their Greek rendition in our Bible? Will the Bible start with Matthew? Will the Bible start with Matthew? Or will the Bible start with Genesis?
Many highly popular writings were excluded, some of which were even more popular than the books that were accepted.
What is straight thinking and proper thinking? And that discussion is not just theological, it's social, it's political, and the answer to those questions is determined by a vote. What are the right books to read, and what books should not pass before the eyes of the faithful? What books should be forbidden for their reading?